Ever wonder what the very first cities on Earth were really like? We're talking thousands of years ago, in a place called Mesopotamia. People there did something that had never been done before. They built huge cities, and it changed the course of human history forever. So how did they pull it off? No, really, think about it for a second. Is your number one problem finding food? Or maybe building houses? What about coming up with rules so people don't go crazy? Well, the ancient Sumerians had to solve all of these problems at once. And believe it or not, their solutions basically created the blueprint for how we live today. So let's travel back in time to around 3500 BCE. People in Mesopotamia are starting to move from these small, quiet farming villages into much, much bigger communities. They were facing that exact challenge we just talked about. How on earth do you organize thousands of people living together for the very first time? Their big idea was something we now call a city-state, and this was a totally new concept. See, a city-state wasn't just a big town, it was more like its own little independent country, with a main city at the center and all the farmland it needed to survive surrounding it. And that's what made them so powerful. Each one was a complete package deal. It had its own king, making decisions, its own laws for people to follow, its own army for protection, and of course, its own farmland to feed everyone. They had it all.
Okay, but getting thousands of people in one place creates a whole new kind of problem. I mean, without computers or even paper, how could you possibly keep track of everything and everyone?
A leader couldn't just keep it all in their head. Can you imagine trying to remember if 5,000 different families paid their taxes this year? Or what the official rules were for buying and selling goods? It would be absolutely impossible. So the Sumerians came up with an incredible invention to solve this. It's called cuneiform, and it was one of the world's very first writing systems. They'd use a sharp tool, kind of like a stylus, to press these little wedge-shaped marks into wet clay. Once the clay dried, boom, you had a permanent record. Now, learning cuneiform was not easy. It took years and years of intense training, so most people couldn't do it. This created a new job for highly skilled experts called scribes. These were the professional writers, and they were super important for making the city run smoothly. And these scribes were busy. They recorded everything: the official laws of the government, records for the temples, lists of who paid their taxes, and even the details of business deals. Writing basically became the operating system for the entire city. All right, so now they can keep records. But that leads to another huge question. In a city this big, who gets to be in charge? Who makes the rules? And how do you convince everybody to actually follow them? For the Sumerians, the answer was all about their religion. They practiced something called polytheism, which just means they believed in many different gods and goddesses. And they thought these gods were in charge of everything, from the weather to whether their crops would grow. Here's how they set up their leadership, and it's pretty clever. They believed that every city had a special god protecting it. Who was the real ruler? The human king on the ground? He wasn't a god. He was seen as the god's representative on earth, the person chosen to make sure the god's wishes were carried out. This is what gave the king the ultimate authority to lead. And to honor their gods, they built these absolutely incredible structures called ziggurats. These were massive temples, built like a pyramid with steps, and they were always right in the middle of the city, towering over everything else. But a ziggurat wasn't just a place to worship. It was the heart of the city's economy and religion. Think of it like a giant cathedral mixed with a central bank. It's where they stored grain and other valuable goods. It was a giant, powerful symbol of the city's success. So we've got laws and leaders. That's great, but none of it matters if your people don't have enough food to eat. This brings us to the next massive challenge the Sumerians figured out: the problem of water. Now, these city-states were built between two huge rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The problem was, these rivers were totally unpredictable. Some years, they'd flood and wipe everything out. Other years, the summers were so hot and dry that there wasn't enough water for the crops. The Sumerians' solution to this was a game-changing piece of technology. They built canals. A canal is really just a waterway that humans build to control where water goes. It sounds simple, but it changed everything. Their plan was brilliant. They built huge networks of canals to capture the river water during the floods. Then, they used gates to control that water, storing it and letting it flow out to the far fields during the long dry season. But here's the key part. This was a huge team effort. The government had to organize hundreds of workers to build the canals and keep them from getting clogged up. So now, let's put all of these pieces together. You see, the Sumerians didn't just solve one problem at a time. They actually created a system where each solution helped support all the other solutions. We've seen how they came up with these amazing systems for government, writing, religion, and technology, and each one of these was a critical piece of the puzzle that helped the whole city thrive. And here is the main takeaway. All these systems were connected, working together like gears in a giant machine. Scribes used writing to help the government organize the big canal projects. Religion gave the king the authority he needed to lead those projects. And that amazing irrigation technology created enough food for everyone. When you have all these different systems working together, government, religion, writing, technology, you get what historians call a complex society. It's a community where all the parts are interconnected, making the whole thing stronger and more organized than ever before. And the Sumerians built the very first one. And that leaves us with one final thought. Those same basic systems invented thousands of years ago are still working in our own communities today. So think about it. How do government, writing, technology, and our shared beliefs help keep your city running? It's pretty amazing to realize it all started back then, in the very first cities on Earth.